If you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description.
Welcome to MINDSHOCK True Crime. This is your host, Bruce McGuire.
And Sid Irwin.
And we are doing our long-awaited follow-up to the O.J. Simpson case. This is episode 2, the O.J. son theory. Did O.J.'s son, Jason, actually perpetrate the crimes that O.J. Simpson was accused of, and O.J. covered up for him, and that's why we have all this weirdness with the evidence? There's also a couple of sub-theories on this theory that we'll be going over, but as always, we will be delving into it in typical MINDSHOCK fashion, going down every single rabbit hole and exploring every single theory with logic and reason at the forefront. I will be taking advantage of Sid Irwin's you've denied being in the Prometheus Society, but I think I'm just going to refer to you as a Prometheus Society member from now on. Do you have a problem with that?
You will say what you will say. So.
So we'll be using Sid Irwin's Promethean IQ to try to make sense of the information available. As always, if you enjoy the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for notifications. If you like this podcast, hit the like button, share it across social media platforms, of which you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, and Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic co-podcaster requests. Depending on your tier, you could also be a guest on the podcast. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. And of course, I will be going over points for and against this theory, because there's obviously some pieces of evidence that point towards OJ's guilt, if not many, as many people would say. However, was the evidence planted by police? In which case is the blood evidence admissible? Because as in the Stephen Avery case, we have all of this obvious planning. Was it obvious in this case? Obviously, we'll be doing a separate episode on the police investigation, but we'll just be focusing on the theory of Jason O.J.'s son perpetrating the crime, or at least being present when the crime was perpetrated. So before we get started, one, what is your view on the case, both as it unfolded originally and now in retrospect? It's particularly OJ's book, "If I Did It." I mean, and his hypothetical interview where he, on TV, when he actually went over if he did it, how he would do it, and what would the purpose of such an interview be? The whole thing's kind of weird to me. I mean, in all these other cases where someone is acquitted, at least in their criminal case, they're acquitted. Do they go on TV and do interviews? Well, hypothetically, if I did do it, I would do it this way, or write books about it. I mean, to me, that's a little strange. I don't know. What are your thoughts on the matter?
I remember seeing it as the time with that trial and case. I mean, I didn't particularly follow it too much then. It just seemed like, another murder case. I guess it's brought to light because it involves celebrities. And I guess it was a bit shocking to see for some folks. To be honest with you, I wouldn't follow it much, and I just wrote it off as whatever it was going to be is what it was going to be. And now, looking back at it, it's intriguing in a sense, at least especially now with him mentioning his books. Like he said, it is a bit weird, but to a degree, I wonder also because, again, that happened, like almost 20 years ago or something like that. All the same, people still talk about it to this day, and in either firm belief that OJ did it, or again, OJ didn't do it. Doesn't matter how the trial ended. Everybody still has their big question about it. And
you are aware he was found guilty in the civil suit because he was, yes, because in a civil suit you only need a preponderance of evidence, not beyond a reasonable doubt.
Gotcha.
So he was convicted in that. We'll be going over that separately. I guess a lot of people don't really know that. And his deposition for the civil suit is also quite strange. I'll be going over that as well in a different episode. I think, and a lot of the problems would be remiss not to talk about CTE, because if he did have a brain injury from football, I mean, again, guilty or innocent, that could throw some wrenches in his behavior, in his statements, right? I mean, some people point to that only to him being guilty. But even if he's innocent, if he does have some kind of CTE, which of course currently I believe they can only diagnose that after death during autopsy, as far as I know, unless you have new information on that. So they're not really going to know if he has it until after he dies.
Huh. Interesting. That's a lot of new information and data I heard of before. But yeah, those would make a a big difference. But even just from a psychological standpoint, to a degree, I mean, him as weird as it is, with him coming with those books and doing an interview, I mean, if enough people will consistently like convey that, they think you did something, despite, whatever else might be said. I
It
can
was
imagine
20.
someone
It
getting
was 20.
irritated by it and then
It was
wanting to be like, well, you know what? If I did.
it was 26 years ago now.
26, wow.
Yeah, it was 1994. But a lot of those interviews have various dates. I mean, late 90s, early 2000s, mid 2000s. So they're all over the place. But you didn't directly answer the question. So you didn't follow it much at the time it was unfolding. But what are your thoughts now in terms of guilty or innocent? Or do you think it's not that simple?
Nothing's ever that simple, but I mean, at the same time, personally, to me, I mean, I would like for there to be justice met if, justice still needs to be dealt, but I don't know.
Yeah, there's a lot of bizarre theories out there, which of course we'll be going into. This one we're only going to focus on his son, but I just
Because
wanted to add that
I'm just saying, I know, despite how big a tragedy it was, I mean, I know there's certain parties that definitely benefited from it deeply, i.e. the Kardashians and the such, so I sure as hell didn't know who they were.
it was a media circus, no question. We went over that in episode 1 a little bit on how the OJ trial was kind of it was probably the biggest true crime media circus. It was big, especially in the 90s, because you didn't in the early 90s, people weren't on the internet as much. I mean, it was very fringe. Whereas for you have some of these more recent true crime cases where it's spread out over the internet a lot too. But anyway, just a quick point about the CTE again. If he does have some kind of brain issues, even if it's not CTE, like he might not remember that he was wearing a certain pair of boots or he had a certain pair of boots. They found those boot prints at the crime scene. He denied it. I mean, there's a lot of people like to fall for these black and white fallacies where, oh, he was lying. If he has some kind of brain condition, it's very possible he didn't know, right? And that's why I actually like the brain fingerprint scan technology that Stephen Avery submitted to in the Making a Murder series, because that's not like a lie detector test. It measures your brain waves, so it just completely jumps over whether or not you're trying to be deceptive or not. So it just goes to whether there's any brainwave recognition of what's being discussed or not, which you can't fake. And of course, the guy that created the brain fingerprint scan technology, he's got a $100,000 reward for anybody who can beat the machine. Nobody has collected the reward, and it's also used, even though I don't know if they've admitted it in court yet. I believe they have not, but it's used by the CIA and all these government agencies and military, and I'm sure they'd be using faulty technology, right? I mean, it's just the naysayers. It's mostly people that think Stephen Avery's guilty for whatever reason. They don't care about the truth. They just want him to be guilty. So they're going to deny all technology and science and everything. But anyway, that would be interesting to see if OJ would agree to submit to a brain fingerprint scan.
Very interesting indeed.
So, all right, let's jump in here. We're going to start this off with a major mind shock right away. So this is from Radar Online. This was published April 18th, 2018. O.J. Simpson's son saw Nicole Brown murdered. So, according to friend, the juice chased down Jason Simpson from blood-soaked crime scene. So, let's get into the details here. In a blockbuster confession, a weeping O.J. Simpson admitted to his best pal that he butchered ex-wife Nicole Brown Simpson and her pal Ron Goldman, and his son Jason was at the crime scene. RadarOnline.com has learned the fallen football hero made the bombshell revelations to his pal Thomas Scotto, who revealed the truth in the last weeks of his life. With his dying breaths, Scotto shared the chilling details. of Simpson's bloody rampage and claimed the disgraced football star flipped out after spying beautiful blonde Brown Simpson with Goldman at her Brentwood home and stabbed both to death. In his own words, Tom told me OJ went berserk, ran to his car, got the knife, and came back. Journalist Allison Kugel, who was writing a book about OJ with Scotto, told Radar. Tom said after OJ did Nicole, he had no choice but to take care of Goldman. What's more, Scotto said Simpson's confession didn't come out right away, and it didn't come out in a casual manner, Kugel told Radar. It was more like a serious, confidential conversation, and Tom said OJ cried several times. He said OJ cried more than once. The guilt-ridden Juice also dropped another bombshell, according to Scotto, who died of a respiratory infection March 21st at the age of 56 before the book was completed. Simpson's then 24-year-old son Jason witnessed the aftermath of the brutal June 94 double slaying, said Kugel. Tom said Jason showed up afterward, Kugel continued, but OJ told Jason, get the expletive out of here because there was no cleaning the murder up. Brown Simpson was found with numerous stab wounds and nearly decapitated from a slit throat. Scotto said Jason had headed to Brown Simpson's house shortly before the murders because he was, quote, afraid something bad was going to go on, end quote, Kugel said. Renowned legal expert Peter Gleason told Radar that Jason, now 48, could face charges if he participated in any part of the murder. If police were to reopen the investigation, this kid could be subject to questioning, he said. This isn't the first time Jason, one of 3 children Simpson had with his first wife, Marguerite Whitley, has been associated with the murders. Bondsman Miguel Pereira claimed a drunken Simpson once told him Jason instigated the bloodshed by attacking Goldman, who had slighted his dad. Simpson allegedly told Miguel, quote, all Jason was trying to do is protect me, end quote. Scotto supported Simpson at his parole hearing in Nevada last July and invited the ex-con to live at his Naples, Florida home after he was released in October after serving 9 years of a 33-year prison sentence for a 2007 botched armed robbery at a Vegas hotel. Which, again, do you remember that on the news? Because allegedly he was trying to steal his own stuff back. I don't know. That's really bizarre, isn't it?
It is bizarre, but no, I had not heard of that.
But in a twist, 3 weeks before his death, Scotto said his motive for revealing Simpson's deathbed confession had more to do with revenge than a book deal. Scotto said that shortly before Christmas 2017, he learned Simpson, who had served as best man at his second wedding in 2007, had bragged about sleeping with his then fiancée. An insider told Radar OJ seduced Scotto's wife before they got married, and he blames OJ for their divorce. Scotto's second ex-wife now lives abroad. Before he passed away, Scotto told Radar, after everything I did for OJ, that was a complete betrayal. I was a brother to him. All right, so what do you make of this story? Because I'm going to break it down in a minute and all the problems with it, but what do you make of all this information?
I mean, it's very odd, very strange. I mean, especially since it seems so late. A mentioning of sorts. This kind of information, because I expect that would be some big highlights during trial that could have been said. And
Well, obviously, Scotto kept. It doesn't say here when OJ admitted this. I'm guessing it wasn't immediately after.
right.
So if it whatever period of time after, I mean, it's bizarre, but
But I mean, even still, to I guess mention it now, which is interesting to me. And then almost sounds like again might be man who might say whatever if he's admitted to the fact that he's been slighted. And I mean, I have a tough time believing some people who may have certain agendas against said person.
But clearly, so here's the problem that I see right off the bat here. If this guy knows that OJ did, so there's two issues here.
Yeah.
One, well, there could be more. But so we'll get into Jason OJ's son and his mental issues. But if he does have mental issues, Scotto knows about it. And if
Right.
he thought OJ was protecting his son, would he keep the secret? But Jason's was 24 years old at the time. We're not talking about a young kid. If it was a young kid, maybe a young
I
teenager
understand.
who was, yeah, it's a little bit more understandable. This is a 24-year-old man. So
And I thought about that
obviously,
too.
you can make the case. So obviously a father might cover for that. But what about the friend of the father? Unless he was really close friends with Jason, which I don't see information on that here. But let's say he was. Now, when he found out that OJ had slept with his fiancee or whatever, why not come out with the information right then and there? Because it seems like this is a deathbed confession. But from research that I've seen online, most deathbed confessions actually are true.
Usually, yeah. I mean, there's
Because
nothing
at
left
that
to
point,
hide.
there's no book deal, there's no reason to lie, unless somehow, perhaps their family members are getting something out of it, which, again, if this lady is writing a book and it's contingent upon some saucy details that need to be made up, would this guy make them up for his family? I don't know. But this whole thing seems strange as well because it's is it possible that OJ, again, if he has CTE, now does he remember the details clearly or not? Because we also have to keep in mind one of the main points against OJ being guilty or against OJ acting alone is that Ron Goldman was a martial arts expert and he was in pretty good shape. And not only that, but there's two people. So it's, for one person to overpower two people, and Goldman, of course, had bruises and such. So he didn't just sneak him from behind. Goldman was involved in a fight. So if Jason was there, is it possible that a fight got out of hand and maybe OJ himself can't even recall the details because of his CTE?
It's a valid point, considering if that's the case.
Yeah, or is it possible OJ stumbled? Yeah, because if OJ stumbled upon Ron Goldman and his son in a fight, who would OJ support there?
Clearly, his son.
And yeah, so we don't know exactly how the knife came into play, but it could have been after a particular moment because if this all happened within
What
20,
kind of knife was it again?
that's a good question. So supposedly the knife has never been found.
Really?
Yes, and it's a whole. The knife probably deserves its own episode because the hoopla is just insane. But a month before Brown, Simpson, and Goldman's deaths, OJ actually bought a 15-inch stiletto knife with a stag handle from Ross Cutlery in downtown LA near where he was filming a movie. Prosecutors thought it could be the murder weapon and asked a coroner to compare that type of blade with the victim's wounds, the LA Times said. The defense team then produced the knife in the preliminary hearing with forensic tests that revealed, quote, the knife was in pristine condition with no scratches or bloodstains to suggest that it had been used in a vicious double homicide, end quote, the LA Times said today. So this is from a March 4th, 2016 article by Emily Shapiro on ABC News, and it also references that there was a knife found at the OJ property in 2016. Investigators do not know yet when the knife was found. A knife was purportedly found at OJ Simpson's old property after they recovered it from a retired LAPD officer within the past month, but a law enforcement official briefed on the investigation says the preliminary assessment is that it is not the murder weapon. The real weapon, the official said, would likely be larger and possibly exotic. So, yeah, the knife saga is one of the staples of the case. So officially there was no murder weapon recovered, so we don't know what kind of knife was used. But he did happen to buy a knife within a month of their deaths. Now that information alone doesn't tell me anything because in an average year, how many knives did OJ buy? Because without knowing that information, it's impossible to tell. Like if he's never bought a knife in his life and that's the only time he bought a knife, that's a little suspicious. But supposedly they tested the knife and they said it wasn't a knife. So I don't know what to tell you there.
That's fair to know. That's actually, like I said, I was curious about that because imagine, if the theory is that, he walked into his son in the middle of a struggle, then, I imagine potentially, I don't think OJ's gonna walk in with a knife like, oh boy, I'm ready to stab somebody and my son happens to be fighting, so hey, this all works out, So,
Well, yeah, and what I was going to say is if there was a fight without a knife, because Ron Goldman had these bruises and such, I
yeah,
think it was determined that they did occur relatively close to time of death or right as his death was going on. But if they occurred, let's say 10 minutes prior, a medical examiner can't tell the difference there. I mean, if it's within minutes. So if there was some kind of fight with no knife, and then OJ maybe OJ was fighting Goldman, and then Jason came in with the knife and he saw his father getting beat up, what's he going to do, especially if he's mentally unstable?
indeed. I
So,
mean, he
yeah.
could have inquired. I mean, I'm pretty sure he probably checked the kitchen and noticed that there probably might have been no knives missing, but that would have been one area that definitely could have.
Well, what I'm going to get into with Jason is that Jason actually worked as a chef with not only endless access to knives, but supposedly he had a knife on him that night.
Oh, oh,
Yes, mind shocking revelations. We're going to get to them in a second. I just wanted to finish up with this confession here because I'm of the opinion that this confession does not tell us a lot, but it could possibly confirm that guilty or innocent, OJ was, or at least thought he was at the crime scene. Is it possible, due to CTE, he became convinced that he was actually at the crime scene when he wasn't?
I mean, I'm no expert about CTE, but I imagine again, you've been to a place enough times, clearly at your home, and then you're either shown images or told about this scene. You might develop, in some sense, like an imaginary thought that you might mistake for memory.
It is tough. When you're dealing with brain injuries, it's very, very difficult. This is one of the rare cases where the brain fingerprint scan might fail, possibly, because if you have some kind of brain condition and either false or confused memories, I don't know. It'd be very interesting to see the results of a brain fingerprint scan because they could obviously ask a whole bunch of other questions that are only somewhat related and then compare those. But I think it's very possible. I think everybody agrees that it's very possible that OJ was at the crime scene, guilty or innocent. I mean, I think we can say that. I'm not sure. The listeners out there, are there any listeners who believe that he was never at the crime scene at all, guilty or innocent? So I don't know. It's weird. Some people think he hired somebody to do the job and then possibly went to the crime scene and saw it or not. So I guess there are people out there that believe he was never there. Again, I wasn't there, you weren't there. We don't really know for sure. And this is Mind Shock, where the only thing we know for sure is that we don't know anything for sure. So yeah, that confession really doesn't do a whole lot for me, but it does paint the picture that it's very possible that he was there. But on the other hand, if Scotto is looking for vengeance, would he make up a confession to make OJ look bad as revenge? Because his story is he wanted to tell the truth as revenge. But why not make a lie for revenge? People do that all the time, right? We're dealing with humans here.
I agree. And that's like I said, if he was jilted in any kind of way, then I mean, to be honest with you, a deathbed confession's also a perfect cover for a lie.
But would he incriminate OJ's son in that for no reason, unless OJ's son also wronged him in some way?
I mean, his son could have wronged him some way, but also could just be a matter of, again, taking away something that, someone loves, as in the sense that they've taken that away from you.
So yeah, hard to say. There are photographs of Jason at the OJ trial, and he looks quite sadistic, unlike the rest of the family. So again, might not mean a lot, especially if he's mentally disturbed and innocent. Then yeah, that could account for that. But I'm gonna go over this article. This is one of the first ones I found. It was actually posted on blacksportsonline.com in 2016, April 6th, written by Robert Little. 5 reasons why OJ's son, Jason Simpson, was likely involved in the murders. Many years ago, I heard a theory that O.J. Simpson didn't kill Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman, but he was aware who did and helped cover it up. That theory got more credence when a private investigator, William C. Deere, came out with the book O.J. is Innocent and I Can Prove It. After reading the book, my suspicion that I had for a long time were confirmed that it was O.J.'s son Jason who was the real killer. Here are 5 reasons why, but if you read the book, there are at least 30 verifiable reasons why Jason was more likely the killer than O.J. 1. Ron Goldman fought for his life. O.J. physically was breaking down and didn't have any bruising on him. Beside a small cut on his knuckle, O.J., who was stripped naked by the LAPD, had 0 bruising on his body. Ron Goldman was a 3rd-degree black belt. He had defensive wounds on his hands and multiple bruising on his hands and arms from striking someone. O.J.'s knees and body had been ravaged by the NFL. It is unlikely he could have gotten into a full-fledged fight with Ron Goldman and had no bruising at all. 2. Jason Simpson had experience assaulting people with deadly weapons. Jason had almost killed an ex-girlfriend with a knife, assaulted another girlfriend, and came after his boss with a kitchen knife. He was trained in hand-to-hand combat as well as field knife training while attending the Army and Navy Academy. O.J. also was squeamish around blood, and there was a lot of blood at the scene. So what are you thinking so far? Jason Simpson, and of course the rumors persist that he actually didn't like Nicole at all. But before we get to all that, we have information here that there were multiple previous assaults with a knife, including an ex-girlfriend, and also his own boss that he came after with a kitchen knife.
Oh my. Well, again, that would show some history of violence. That never helps.
And mental instability, but also he was well trained in hand-to-hand combat and field knife training.
Which would also give the ability to convey that he could take on Ron Goldman.
Especially with a knife, yeah.
Yeah.
But even without a knife, because we don't know if he had any bruising on him that night. That's the thing. So O.J. didn't, but we don't know whether Jason did or didn't. Let's continue here. Jason was off his antipsychotic meds at the time. Jason had been diagnosed with intermittent rage disorder, which is commonly known as Jekyll and Hyde syndrome. He had been known to black out, hear voices, and just go crazy at any time. He had been committed to the hospital several times. He was given medication to keep it under control, but he had stopped taking it months before the murder. What do you make of that, Sid Irwin?
Wow, that is that's a lot.
Yes, a guy who has rage disorder, a history of people attacking people with knives, and also trained in hand-to-hand combat and knife training from a military academy.
It's almost too good.
And he was admitted to a hospital several times and had antipsychotic medication that he had supposedly stopped taking. And this is only reason number 3. All right, so continuing on here, the physical evidence matches Jason more than O.J., but the LAPD never followed up. So there's someone here found a photograph of Jason wearing a dark-colored knit cap while playing with his dog on his bed. This knit cap is suspected to be the one found at the crime scene, which contained hairs from an African-American male as well as hairs from a dog. O.J. didn't have a dog and didn't wear knit hats, but Jason had a dog and wore knit hats often. DNA was found under Nicole's fingernails that didn't match O.J.'s, but they never tested it against Jason's DNA. In a storage locker, a knife owned by Jason fit the knife that was used at the scene. The knife that the cops thought O.J. used did not fit any of the wound patterns. So I actually haven't really looked at this information that...
Even still, I'm curious, because it would have OJ's DNA on file, because, it got processed. But on top of that,
well, apparently...
it should still show familial markers to a degree.
Well, Jason, yeah, but if you test it, right? They didn't test it
Yeah.
against Jason. So, but also the LAPD found 15 unknown fingerprints at the scene and none matched OJ. They never compared them to Jason Simpson's known fingerprints. But the thing is, Jason Simpson's in the system as well. He has these assaults, so it's not like he's not in the system. Once the LAPD locked in on OJ, they potentially missed opportunities to find the real killer. So here's something that's not really talked about. People mention OJ's DNA that was found at the scene, but they don't mention the DNA under Nicole's fingernails, and they don't mention all of these unknown fingerprints. Now, the unknown fingerprints might not mean much. It's unclear whether there were 15 distinct unknown fingerprints from 15 different people, or this is the same one or two people, and they just never found out who they were.
So potentially, someone could have broken
But
into the
not
house.
OJ. But none of them matched OJ, which is strange, is it not?
It is strange. I mean, that could open up the opportunity to say that someone could have broken into the house, committed a robbery gone wrong, killed Ron, Nicole, and left, and OJ could have came in to the scene and be like, oh my god.
Number 5, Jason has no alibi and was upset at Nicole. No one knows where Jason was during the time of the killings. His time card from his place of employment was handwritten, even though the automatic machine was working. That's kind of damning. So instead of clocking out with the auto timestamp, you're gonna handwrite it.
That doesn't help.
That does not help at all. Okay. He was upset that Nicole didn't come to his restaurant the day of the murder, and by all accounts, he had a love-hate relationship with his stepmother. The last and final thing, if you need even more convincing, OJ hired a criminal defense lawyer for Jason 4 days after the murder, when OJ at the time was the only suspect. To me, that's not that strange, because if OJ doesn't trust the police,
Very true.
and there's so many wrenches here, because if he has CTE and he's guilty but he thinks he's innocent, what does that mean?
That is also very.
That also could affect his judgment to the point where he's going and making these interviews and writing these books, if I did it, because if he has CTE, that's going to be weird, because guilty or innocent, it's going to cause him to make some very strange decisions. All
That's
right.
very true. At least about
So-
predictable.
So I'm going to go over a very detailed write-up now from Reddit. This was posted on Unpopular Opinion subreddit by Red Rover Dover 4 months ago, and it ties in most of the information on Jason here. O.J. Simpson didn't kill Nicole and Ron. It was his son, Jason. Jason was a sous chef. He quite literally had a set of knives on him that very night. Jason had a punch-out ticket to clock out at work, but that night he didn't use it. His time that he left was written in for the first time ever. This means no one knows when he actually really left. So in all of his history of working, that night is the only night that he handwrote his time out.
Subordinate. Sue. I mean, subordinate, still subordinate chef. AK like a second. That's what I thought when the client would have meant.
Good call on that. Okay. So yeah, that's a little suspicious. Whenever you're looking at any crime, you're looking at people that behaved differently the day of the crime or the night of the crime than ever before. And we do have that here, which is suspicious. Okay. Jason lied about his whereabouts and said he was with his girlfriend. It later came out during the civil deposition that he had lied. He then claimed he was home alone after work. Another red flag. Changing stories. He had absolutely no alibi for the time of the murders. None. When this line of questioning took place, Jason got very nervous, and the lawyer asked what was going on, and they immediately took a break. They came back from break, and this line of questioning was not revisited, which is insane. Jason was supposed to cook for Nicole and the kids that night, and Nicole changed her mind and went to another restaurant instead. This would have ticked him off. Why would it have ticked him off? He had rage issues and a possible crush on Nicole, as well as disdain. A lot of weird feelings. So this poster is alleging that this whole relationship was bizarre, but this guy was definitely had psychotic meds that he wasn't taking, and he had been admitted to a hospital previously and diagnosed with intermittent rage. What do you make of all this so far? And now we have a situation that very night, Nicole pissed him off.
Makes for a really great thriller movie.
Oh, you're stealing Maxwell's line? That would make a good movie.
Well, I guess in this case I am. But it really would. I mean, only probably because I have seen similar plot lines and setups, but that's again.
Have you
happening
seen
in
one
real
where
life.
the guy's name is Jason and he likes to use a knife? He has rage issues. I mean, did this guy? How many times did this guy watch Friday the 13th?
Indeed.
I mean, this whole thing is bizarre. But okay, Jason at the time of the murders was on probation for threatening a prior boss with a knife. Seriously. Jason had threatened suicide to a girlfriend in an argument and stabbed himself. Are you getting a clearer picture now?
It definitely would make a lot more sense in that regard.
Jason attended the Army and Navy Academy and was trained with a knife. Jason had been taking Depakote for his rage. He was off his meds at the time. Jason, when he was much younger as a teen, was in charge of his youngest sister swimming in the pool with no one else around. She drowned to death. OJ and his wife broke up soon after, splitting the family apart. From here, OJ would end up wifing Nicole. This context is very important. So, does this have a horror movie written all over it now? So, there's a younger sister who mysteriously drowned when he was the only one around.
Wow.
Now, I'm not alleging that he murdered her, but although I wasn't there, so I don't know. But if he was simply negligent, what kind of mental effect would that have on him, particularly if he loved his sister?
That could be devastating.
And then if that was the reason that OJ and his wife, the kid's mother, split up, that means literally he's the reason they split up.
So that's a lot to take on for a kid.
It's very bizarre. Whoever killed Nicole and Ron would have been covered in blood. Remember, Ron put up a fight. Getting into a car certainly would have meant more than a few drops of blood. We never got to see Jason's Jeep, but we know that it was left out in the rain uncovered after the murders. The only person on this planet O.J. Simpson would have covered for would have been his son. Really think about that. Not anyone else but his son, whom he also felt he had failed in life. He felt responsible for him, paid his way through life, and this was his first son. So the theory is that Jason, in his rage, went to Nicole's home to confront her about dinner. He realized what was happening with Ron. He went back, got a knife from his Jeep, and came back and killed them in rage. Jason didn't give an expletive that his stepbrother and sister were in the house asleep. He just raged out. These were the early days of cell phones, and the cops never looked at cell phone records. Jason called his dad on his cell phone and told him he needed to come over. OJ showed up, saw what Jason did, and split his hand open in anger, hitting something. He ordered Jason to go home and clean up and get rid of the clothes, and he would go home as well and pretend like nothing happened. That night, he also called a lawyer for Jason. Yes, the next day, Jason already had a lawyer. Fact. No one else but Jason already had a lawyer. And when the police tried to question him, they were rebuffed. But they didn't try hard. Christopher Darden wanted to go after him, but was rebuffed. The focus was to entirely be on OJ. Jason Simpson got away with murder, and O.J. Simpson got away with messing with the crime scene and accessory to murder at worst. The knit cap that O.J. supposedly wore had dog hairs in it that were unexplained. There are pictures of Jason wearing the same knit cap or a variation of it with his dog. Look at this guy. He has the build and was youthful enough to do this. OJ could very well have gifted the pair of shoes to his son, And there is more, much more. There's more that points to Jason to the death than OJ for sure. We know at the time he had a set of knives on him and was unaccounted for. We know who was on probation for attacking someone with a knife. We know he was off his Depakote meds for his intermittent rage disorder. We know he was angry with Nicole. We know he wore these knit caps. Knives, violence, rage, trained with a knife. This is your guy. The riage behind OJ is so pronounced that people would never admit their mistakes. The race issue is so deeply embedded. You say OJ didn't do it, and people lose their minds. But once you follow down the rabbit hole about his son Jason, you realize that everyone was wrong. OJ wasn't guilty of murder, but he surely wasn't innocent either. Check out the book by Bill Deere. Look at the facts for yourself, the actual facts. Read the civil deposition yourself. You will see something is horrifically wrong here. So, what do you make of that? So, I think the author here took a few liberties, but in general, do the basic points point to Jason?
I mean, if all that information he gave can be verified and corroborated, then I must admit those are some very solid, the solid direction and pointed.
Most people just refer to the fact that the LAPD is just grossly incompetent.
I know nothing of their work personally, but I must admit that to a degree, if there is a rather certain level of hearsay that most people tend to agree with, it's definitely worth looking into, considering as a deep possibility.
Some people actually chimed in also that in their forensics classes, they actually went over the case and said that it was more likely that OJ covered for his son. Just looking at all the information available and what doesn't match up and what does match up.
And I gotta admit, with that, I can't believe because it's not like it was a perfect crime where no evidence was found, or
Oh, far from it.
exactly, or some other kind of some other kind of murder or incident could have been committed instead. Like again, like I said, maybe a robbery gone wrong, or someone who just was looking for OJ but found her instead, and blah blah blah. But like this is legit as. Which from as a kid, I just like got that idea. Like, okay, it seemed like this was like a bloody mess, and yet somehow you're not sure if he did it. And that to me, or even as a kid, was a little like, I'm sorry, that doesn't make much sense. If there's that much that's going on, like, should this be like an open and shut case? But again, if a person wasn't, if the theory holds, where OJ came into the scene or was called and brought over, and everything either had already happened or he had just gotten a part of it, then yeah, in truth, I mean, it would make sense because he didn't do it. I mean, again, accessory, sure, but the actual deed itself, that's too much evidence to try and think of to point it at yourself to try to cover for it. And OJ is an ex-football player. He's not gonna think like that. He's no Hannibal Lecter or anything like that. So I cannot lie. I mean, personally, to me, I find it to be a very interesting theory, and one that I actually can surprisingly find myself leaning towards. Again, if the information does hold.
So yeah, there was the issue. We'll have to do a separate episode just on the DNA evidence. But is it possible the evidence wasn't planted and it was simply, since they didn't check against Jason's DNA, as you pointed out, it could have been familial DNA that would match either Jason or OJ and would need to be specifically isolated.
I mean, very much so. I mean, if there's any suggestion of planted evidence, it would probably only be due to the fact that again, they would clearly, obviously, already recognize that there is no evidence solidly leading to or pointing towards OJ.
But see,
Which
this is just complete incompetence because Jason, who's an offender, they have his fingerprints on file, and apparently nobody bothered to check them. I mean, they could still do that now. Why not now check his fingerprints against the 15 fingerprints found at the scene?
I mean, I agree, and technically they probably should, but it also makes me wonder to a degree if as to where those fingerprints were found, because I mean, he's probably been over that house multiple times before that.
Yeah, and apparently they also checked the distance from the restaurant, and theoretically the time could have worked for him to leave work, kill them, go elsewhere. The cell phone records, I would bet now, regardless of the year, nothing's ever really deleted. So like I'm sure they could they have to have some kind of information. I mean, we have eyewitness accounts from the Jack the Ripper murders in the 1800s. I'm sure there's some kind of information about cell phone activity. Now, the LAPD didn't think to check it at the time, but the carriers would have it backed up somewhere. What was going on with the cell phone activity between OJ and Jason? It seems like a motivated investigator can track that down.
Honestly, I could agree with you on that. I mean, again, like that's to a degree, even though it's still to a degree like early stage forensics and such. But you know, and even with like you said about cell phones and all that too. But as of nowadays, you know, like you said, more than likely nothing's ever really deleted. And they are keeping those said kind of files somewhere in their storage facilities or whatever it is. And if someone, so like you said, if some dedicated cop really wanted to, they probably could go out there, find us that information, especially with all the new technology today.
And also brain fingerprint scan Jason to see what information he has. But here's another point here. On the night of the murder, there was a dance recital, and Jason had a chef's table for all of Nicole's family and OJ Simpson to come and eat at his restaurant. For whatever reason, they didn't show up. They went to eat at Mezzaluna instead, where you wanna hear another mind shock?
Go right ahead.
That's where Ron Goldman worked as a server.
Oh my, that's funny.
And OJ was not invited over there. So it seems like there was a lot more drama that night than most people know about.
Which could explain a lot of things, because I mean, after all, motive is very key. And
It does explain a lot, especially when, I mean, do we have motive means opportunity, and on top of that, a history of violence with a knife, psychotic medications not being taken. This is all, it's like a perfect storm, and there's definitely more to this theory than OJ doing it, right? Especially with zero bruising on his body. I think people are not factoring in potential CTE because if he has CTE or some other brain condition, that could definitely affect his words and his actions, both guilty and innocent. That's why it doesn't seem to add up on either side. I know some people that think he's guilty no matter what. Some people think he's innocent no matter what. But regardless, there's the wrenches thrown in here are could possibly be because of his CTE. Again, guilty or innocent. So here's one of the best rebuttal comments to this theory I've seen on Reddit. OJ definitely didn't do it. As for Jason, I think it's an interesting theory, plausible at least. I know Investigation Discovery did a train wreck series about this scenario with Bill Deere. Some interesting stuff before they interviewed the usual idiots like Cato, and then somehow try to bludgeon us with more OJ did it nonsense. Probably the more likely murderers are drug related either through Goldman or Faye Resnick. That being said, Jason Simpson does seem unstable. So here's the thing. We are going to be going into that avenue. There is a theory that there were some drug people and hitmen involved on the side of Nicole Brown and Faye Resnick. And then there's another theory that Ron Goldman was the actual target with a whole different slew of suspects on his side. And we'll be going over all of that because this is MINDSHOCK and this is an ongoing series. But just to focus on Jason here, this case definitely doesn't appear as open and shut as some have made it out to be.
that is for sure, because, again, as I said before, as a child, you know, hearing the case and watching it occasionally, none of this information was ever really made clear to me.
I'm going to throw out another mind shock because this is mind shock, and this will be the final mind shock of the episode as we've kind of gone over mostly everything there is to go over regarding this. But is it possible, because we're not falling for logical fallacies here like black and white fallacies, is it possible it's all true and that's why it looks the way it looks? Because let's say Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman actually did have possibly a common link criminal element, either drug dealer, some mafia people, whoever. I mean, there's even, I think, a theory about a satanic cult. There always seems to be a theory about a satanic cult in like every single high-profile case. But regardless, let's say there was a common link or not, or just one of them. They were there that night also. One of the 15 fingerprints, some of the 15 fingerprints belong to them. They instigated something. Is it possible Jason was on his way there to confront, to threaten, but not to kill? Because as far as we know, from all of these previous issues, he threatened to kill himself, he stabbed himself, he threatened to kill others with a knife, he's prone to violent rages and assaults. But, and we have that question mark about the drowning, which he was a teenager, very likely that was accidental or negligent in some way. So on record, he's never been convicted of killing anybody, and he's never definitively killed anybody with a knife. So is it possible he was just there to threaten and yell and cause a scene, but he stumbled upon some kind of a drug deal or something associated with Ron Goldman? Is it possible all these things are true and then OJ was there also?
I can't lie. I was actually about to promote that same theory.
Really?
No, I really was. Since you, I mean, I had thought about before. I mean, there could, it could be a chance that we had mentioned, either Robert got wrong, or AKA there might have been some other incident or something that might involve, again, someone being attacked or chased after for whatever particular reason outside of OJ and all of this. So, I mean, if you combine the two together, that could also work. You never know. Because that could also explain why. Because if Jason came there, like you said, maybe to confront her, instead stumble on said scene, called his
Especially,
father bugged out, might think it's Jason because of his history, and then thus doesn't.
yes. So especially if these are some heavy hitters, either drug cartel, mafia guys, possibly associated with the LAPD. We do know there's LAPD corruption. It's actually been exposed in the past. So would that cause them not to blow the whistle on the real criminals? Because if the LAPD, or at least one or two members of the LAPD high ranking, were somehow involved with the mafia or a drug cartel, and let's say OJ either knew or suspected that, he could never tell them the truth, and neither could the son, because now they're all in danger, right?
That would be very true.
So the case is very, very weird, but I think we've covered just about every mind-shocking theory involving the son Jason. But I mean, there's even more details. I mean, there's diary entries and things like that that show some issues with the relationship between Jason and Nicole and all of these other things. But this scenario does seem more plausible than all of the loose ends in the official theory, because if OJ had a bruise on his, or a cut on his knuckle, I mean, people punch stuff all the time when they're mad. I mean, again, how many times in your life have you had a bruise on your knuckle? The people that say that automatically points to some kind of knife fight with Ron Goldman. I mean, it's kind of weird, right?
That's extremely weird. And I can't lie, I've had punched a wall or two in my time.
I think everybody has, particularly if you're OJ and you stumble upon this type of scene. And again, if there were other people present, is it possible he punched somebody else?
Very true.
Because this whole, I mean, it could be very traumatic to deal with the situation. And again, depending on who was involved, whether or not the LAPD members that were or were not corrupt were involved, it could mean that none of this would have really been disclosed, because these people would, of course, fear for their lives and their families. So that rounds out the episode. Any questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. As always, if you enjoy the podcast, you donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for notifications. If you like the podcast, hit that like button, share it across social media platforms, of which you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, co-podcaster, logical analyses, requests. You could also be a guest on the podcast, depending on your tier. This is Bruce McGuire, signing off.
Considerably.
Catch you guys next time.